Welcome back. We are continuing on our journey into the reaction patterns. Last time we talked about spongiotic reaction patterns, and today we are talking about the psoriasiform patterns as the main patterns that happen in the epidermis. And we said last time that the main feature for psoriasiform reaction patterns is the regular epidermal hyperplasia. When we look into Weedon's textbook, we notice that this chapter is divided into two categories: the major psoriasiform dermatoses and other psoriasiform dermatoses. And the reason being is the second group don't have all the psoriasis features. As always, I like to start with the normal skin histology for you to compare. When we have regular epidermal hyperplasia, the reedy ridges are usually elongated regularly, and we have parakeratosis and dilated blood vessels in the superficial dermis with thin suprapapillary epidermis and neutrophils. We can call this lesion psoriasis, and we will talk about the mechanism in a little bit later for why we see these changes. But the clinical picture is unique, and we all are familiar with how these lesions look as well: demarcated erythematous patches that could be itchy, and in the plaque form it takes the silver color. If you try to scrape them, it will leave bleeding points. The interesting part about psoriasis is the relationship with cancer, and the literature recommends screening patients, especially for colon cancer, as well as a detailed family history for other known cancers. The pathophysiology for psoriasis is very complex, especially the genetic causes, as there are no single gene mutation responsible, but multiple genes involvement. There are multiple models for to explain the psoriasis pathophysiology, but as a general idea, the initial event is a signaling pathway problem that affects the keratinocytes and the transcription factors of the cytokines, which will lead to simulating the VEGF vascular growth factor and the EGF epidermal growth factor, which will cause increased vascular proliferation and activating the lymphocyte and other inflammatory cells, which will lead to epidermal hyperplasia and activation of inflammatory cells and neutrophil attraction. All these events require genetic susceptibility, and then we have psoriasis. Another disease in this category is psoriasiform keratosis, and this is the first paper that introduced this term in 2007, where the authors noticed that this disease appear on low power as BVK or benign verrucous keratosis, but on high power it reveals the psoriasis features like Monroe microabscesses, hypogranulation, and the presence of intraepidermal pustules, and of course the papillary dermis that has the ectatic or dilated small vessels. The difference between this and the regular psoriasis is clinically this condition has a single lesion and found in elderly, and also like clinically has like multiple features. It could appear as SK, BCC, AK, or SCCIS. And on pathology, we see, in addition to the psoriasis features, the hyperkeratosis, as we see here, and also the less psoriasiform hyperplasia, the regular psoriasiform hyperplasia we see in psoriasis. Another condition in this category is the HIV or human immune deficiency virus related psoriasis. And in these papers that appear, one in JAMA and the other in JAD, the authors noticed that patients with HIV when they have psoriasis and they are treated with hard therapy, uh, their psoriasis improves. And for that reason, they suggested that psoriasis in these patients is related to HIV. When they study further the HIV related psoriasis, they found that this condition differs from the regular psoriasis. In the epidermis, we don't see here the suprapapillary plate does not thin or does not appear like abnormal as the regular psoriasis. And also the apoptosis appears to be like a main feature in HIV related psoriasis, where we see apoptotic keratinocytes and also apoptotic lymphocytes with a few plasma cells. Another condition we see in this category also, and as always, we start with normal skin. So when we see the epidermal hyperplasia with pustules filled with neutrophils, we think of pustular psoriasis. And in this disease, clinically, the pustule will point out the diagnosis, as we see pustules on erythematous base and constitutional symptoms. The psoriasiform hyperplasia is a chronic feature, and the length of the elongation depends on the time. You have also to differentiate this condition from AGIB because of the pustules, and we talked about this in the Spongiotic lecture. If you want to go back and check that lecture, and we said that in AGIB, the pustules are usually small, and we see apoptosis in addition to the vasculitic changes. Another form special from pustular psoriasis is generalized pustular psoriasis, and it was named after Austrian-German dermatologist. And the importance of this disease is the high mortality rate. And the recognition is the clinical picture, as we see the entire body is affected by pustular psoriasis in, for example, an ICU patient. Histologically is usually similar to pustular psoriasis, where we see the pustules and the epidermal hyperplasia along with the dermal vascular proliferation. But the unique clinical picture, as we see here, as the name implies, generalized in these patients. Another condition in this category is the reactive arthritis syndrome or Reiter's syndrome. And you remember the symptoms from USMLE: can't see, can't pee, can't climb the tree. Also the unique clinical keratodermal features. Histologically is similar to pustular psoriasis, but the corneal layer is usually thick in this condition, and it can be explained by the keratodermal clinical features. You can pause now the video if you want to think about the diagnosis for this lesion. Here we see the normal skin, and here we see the abnormal skin. So we see diffuse orthokeratosis along with parakeratosis. And the parakeratosis, if you look carefully into the nuclei, they say it looks like the chessboard, as the nuclei is arranged in this fashion. We have also plugging in the hair follicle unit along with acanthosis, but the acanthosis here is not as regular as we see in the psoriasis. And also the plate of the redi is broad, and the suprapapillary plate is also thick. In addition, we see hypergranulosis or hypergranulation. So this is PRP or pityriasis rubra pilaris. So as the name implies, pityriasis is a scaly lesion. Rubra is orange-red rash. Pilaris is Latin for hair. So as you see here, clinically, scaly orange-red rash, thickened and scaling follicles. Usually this disease appears as single lesion as seborrheic dermatitis like rash, but then spreads to the entire body usually is worsened by the sun exposure and is associated with HIV, arthritis, internal cancer like SCC, cholangiocarcinoma, Down syndrome, and CARD14 mutation. In CARD14 mutation patients, usually the mutations is related to NF-kappa B pathway, and when there is gain of function we see psoriasis, but when there is loss of function we see atopic dermatitis. Usually this condition is found in families and affect young adults, and usually patients are resistant to therapy. Another condition in this category is the lichen simplex chronicus, and the concept is very simple. So when you have an itchy skin and the lesion persists, you get increased thickness of the epidermis. And what you see is scaly thickened plaques where there is compact orthokeratosis overlying hypergranulosis. So usually is found in the neck, in the wrist, anal genital area, shin, and dorsal of the foot. So clinically, it appears as dry, scaly lesion and itchy, where you see the compact orthokeratosis along with parakeratosis, but in focal area. We see thick granular layer, psoriasiform hyperplasia. Sometimes we see minimal papillomatosis, and the most important feature is the dermal fibrosis and vascular proliferation. As we see in this example, we see here a little bit of papillomatosis, compact orthokeratosis. We see the dermis, how it is fibrous, and we see increased vascularity. We have to differentiate this lesion from prurigo nodularis because of the similarity in the epidermal hyperplasia and also the thick corneal layer. But the difference between lichen simplex chronicus and prurigo nodularis is clinically where we see the nodules or the cup-shaped lesion. So we finished the first category, and we now move our attention to the second category, other psoriasiform dermatoses. We covered some of these lesions in the past, and we will cover some of these conditions also in another lectures. And we will turn our attention today to the rest of the list. So one word just for the spongiotic dermatitis, and I talked in more details about these conditions in the previous lecture, where we see the spongiosis, basically the spaces between the keratinocytes, and as the disease progresses, we start seeing that the spongiosis maybe is decreased because probably here you treated the patient. But if you biopsy the lesion here as the disease is a chronic with some flaring up, you may not see the spongiosis, and you may see only the psoriasiform hyperplasia of the epidermis. So the difference here between these conditions and psoriasis is the cell type. So in spongiotic dermatitis, we see eosinophils and plasma cells, along, of course, with lichen simplex chronicus because of the itching, but in psoriasis, the main cell type is neutrophils. This is an example I showed last time where we see the epidermal hyperplasia with the parakeratosis and also the eosinophils. So another disease in this category is a disease that starts with the localized lesion on the body and then is associated with the pneumonic ID scalp, either idiopathic, drug, or seborrheic dermatitis, contact dermatitis, atopic dermatitis, lymphoma or leukemia, and psoriasis. Then the whole body basically is affected, more than 90% of the body surface, with the scaling, edema, and erythema. The clinical picture is erythematous lesions, and on histology actually is not very specific. We only see psoriasiform hyperplasia with mild spongiosis. So the diagnosis is erythroderma or exfoliative dermatitis. Another lesion in this category is we see here orthokeratosis alternating with parakeratosis with psoriasiform epidermal hyperplasia and no granular cell layer under the parakeratosis area. This is inflammatory linear verrucous epidermal nevus or ILVEN. So this is a nice example of the lesion where we see the alternating parakeratosis with orthokeratosis along with no granular cell layer and epidermal hyperplasia. Clinically, it appears as itchy linear eruption on the extremity. Scabies is easy to recognize because of the organism in the corneal layer. Uh, Norwegian scabies is usually found in immune suppressed and physically debilitated individuals. Syphilis also has unique histology where we see the psoriasiform hyperplasia along with the lichenoid reaction and plasma cells. Whenever you see these three combinations, always order troponimal staining, and sometimes the results are very satisfying as we see in this picture. We have two autosomal recessive conditions in this category. The first one is clinically appears as scaly lesions, hyperpigmented on the face in a child. This is lamellar ichthyosis. Usually we see on histology prominent orthokeratosis, focal parakeratosis. The granular cell layer may be thickened or normal, and psoriasiform hyperplasia. The other condition is acrodermatitis enteropathica, where we see because of these lesions on the skin, in addition to the other features that we see in psoriasiform hyperplasia, we see the necrosis of the epidermis and subcorneal clefting. Is not clear in this picture, but in the book or if you go online to see like some features is very clear that in this lesion, and probably you can expect from the clinical picture that you will see the subcorneal clefting. Finally, we have pellagra, and we all know this is a niacin deficiency where you see a scaly rash and the blisters with hyperpigmentation and desquamation. The pellagra was named by Frappoli in 1771 when the disease was endemic in Italy, and the name comes from pel in Italian means skin, and agra means holy, as we see in this picture of the plant. Finally, I will leave you with this table I made. I don't think the psoriasis is very difficult to recognize, but some people like to study the different features in each diseases. So I created this table for people if they prefer to kind of visualize different features, where I included the same category as Weedon, the first category as the major psoriasiform dermatoses, and the other psoriasiform dermatoses, where I included the special features, that unique features to each disease, and then I divided the different features based on the epidermis and the dermis. This concludes the chapter, and I will leave you now with some examples under the microscope. Thank you.